Hi everyone, this is Rebecca Tucci, and welcome to the Teen Dating Violence, Cyber Abuse, Social Media, and the Courts. We're so glad that you decided to join us. I'm the program manager here at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and I manage the training and technical assistance for courts on dating violence. This project, so the overall project, is focused on increasing capacity of judges and court personnel to prioritize victim safety, hold offenders accountable, promote rehabilitation of offenders, and leverage community support for innovative youth services for teen dating violence. I want you all to know that before we start, that we are planning on doing a National Judicial Institute on teen dating violence. So this will be 4 judges on February 28th through March 2nd of 2020 in Austin, Texas. And our media blitz and all that information will be coming in the next few weeks. So what I'd like to do now is do an introduction of our 2 facilitators. Stephanie Bowman is a program manager here at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And Nicole Beck is one of our partner organizations, and she is the staff attorney at Break the Cycle. Without further ado, I'm going to let you all go ahead and begin your conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. As she said, my name is Nicole Beck. I'm a staff attorney at the national nonprofit Break the Cycle. We focus on teen dating violence, and in DC, where I'm located, we have a legal team that provides representation to survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking who are 24 years of age or younger. Stephanie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Stephanie Bowman, and I am a program attorney here at the National Council. Before I came to the National Council, I was working back in Kansas at the Coalition, doing a lot of work, training on domestic violence, sexual violence, and stalking, as well as providing direct representation on protection orders and some other issues. So that's kind of how I came to be studying technology and its intersections and why I'm here. So yeah, that's pretty much me. So today our training objectives, we hope presenters better understand teen culture, especially as it intersects with technology.
We also hope that you'll learn how social media, apps, and other cyber technology can be used to either compound or combat teen dating violence.
We also want to identify safety strategies for keeping you safe from technology-facilitated abuse.
So before we begin, I always think it's a good idea to get into the mindset of a young person, to remember a little bit about what it was like to be a young person and to begin thinking about what it might be like to be a young person today, since we are generally all adults in the room. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this discussion by Stephanie and I answering these questions with each other. And while we're answering them, if you could answer them yourselves in the chat box so we can start getting an idea of where everybody is as a group, that would be really helpful. So Stephanie, what is the last cool thing that you learned from a younger person?
So this took me some thinking, because I learn a lot from young people all the time, especially about how to be more proficient with like Word or PowerPoint or any of that stuff on a daily basis at work. But I think the last real cool thing I learned, well, it was cool to me, and everybody else is probably going to think I'm crazy for having to have had that I'm, a little bit off having to have somebody tell me about it, but it was pre-ordering through apps like Starbucks. I was at a conference and there was a huge line because there was only one place to get coffee for everybody at the conference, and one of my coworkers, who's a lot younger than me, explained to me that I can just order on the app and it'll be there waiting for me and I can skip the line, and it was beautiful and it worked, and it really changed my conference experience. How about you?
Very cool. So I recently learned from, we had a high school intern at Break the Cycle who taught me about a new social media platform called Monkey, which connects you with a random stranger in the world for a video chat. and you have 30 seconds to video chat with this random stranger, and then you have an option to either add more time on or to become friends with the person so that you could chat with them anytime. And it's apparently the hip new thing with the young people. So I hadn't heard of it previously. I thought it was really interesting that there's always more social media platforms out there. If anybody in the audience would like to add their own thoughts, Shelley Matthews says that they learned about the app Marco Polo. I'm actually not sure what that is, so I think that just...
I do. I am, because I learned it from one of my younger coworkers. So yeah, that was one of the other ones I learned, definitely. It's another video chat sort of social media. It's awesome, yeah.
Very great. All right, and then we'll open this one up for the audience as well while we talk about it ourselves. So if you have something to add, please type it into the comment box. How did adults talk to you when you were a teenager, Stephanie?
I think it depended on the adults. I think I had a way better connection with adults who actually talked to me about as if I was also an adult, and talked to me about, like, treated me as if I could have opinions about things, especially teachers who really pushed critical thinking. I think those are the ones that talked to me as I wanted to be talked to, and then there are also adults that treated me as if I was too young to have any sort of experience and too young to know anything, not really, considering my opinion. That was really frustrating. And you?
Yeah, absolutely the same thing. I remember adults mostly talking to me like I couldn't understand complex concepts, like I wasn't able to process them, and sort of mistaking a lack of life experience for stupidity. At least that was the way it felt when they would speak to me in sort of a condescending way. And I remember always really wanting adults to just sort of be straight with me, tell me what they were really feeling, what they were really thinking, instead of sort of dancing around things.
Mm-hmm.
In the comments, we have someone said, I would have liked for adults in my life to spend more time with me. I don't feel like I talked to adults much as a teenager. And I definitely remember feeling that way too, like adults didn't really have time for me. And almost as if like anything that I really wanted to understand was too much to ask of an adult to actually sit down and explain it to me, and instead they were just sort of like, why don't you get this already? I remember being very frustrated by that. All right, and Stephanie, do you remember what it was like to be young and in love?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I think the hard thing about being young and in love is that it's all new, and so there's a lot of just feeling overwhelming emotions, but I'm trying to learn how to deal with them and understand them, while also trying to learn boundaries and what relationships even mean when it's actually you in a relationship. So I think that there's so much that goes into it that just feels overwhelming and both exciting and scary that, yeah, it just kind of makes me feel kind of anxious again.
I like the way you phrase that, exciting and scary, because that's exactly how I remember it too. And I remember feeling like everything was the biggest deal in the world because it was the first time I had experienced it. And feeling like this was it. This is the one. This is what everybody's talked about and what everybody told me to expect from love and that sort of thing. And, looking back on it, I have more of a perspective of, it wasn't as big of a deal as I remember it being, but in the moment it felt so real, so big, and so overwhelming. We've got someone else, Ellie Menezes says, I remember being frustrated by all the things I was told I would understand, quote, when I got older, and I wanted to understand them right then. I also remember feeling really frustrated by everybody saying, oh, you'll figure it out when you're older, rather than trying to actually connect with me and help me understand now.
Definitely.
All right, and then the last one, and this one is really open to everybody. What are the electronic platforms that you've seen misused to perpetrate abuse among teens?
I am really interested to see what everybody says on this one. I know that when I was, a year or two ago working more closely with direct services and with advocates working with victims, I know that there was a lot of Snapchat. There was a lot of threats to post things on Instagram, those kinds of things. When I started out, it was there were a lot of Twitter, but that has kind of seemed to die down on Facebook amongst this population, but definitely still seeing the threats to post on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
Yeah, I'm seeing mostly Snapchat and Instagram, and it looks like the people in the comments agree. A lot of Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. Somebody mentioned Kick, which I haven't seen in quite a while, but glad to know that that's still out there kicking, pun intended. So yeah, it looks like Snapchat is the one that people agree is most often happening, which obviously comes with a lot of complications because the whole purpose of Snapchat is the material on it disappears rather quickly. And so that presents all kinds of challenges for survivors and the people who work with them. I'm going to give everybody one last second to add in any other platforms they're seeing. I'm also seeing text messaging and just having the phone itself, anything on the phone to control the other person's time, text, Snapchat, or even just calling until the person answers the phone. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of phone calls, repetitive, harassing phone calls as well, of just calling and calling and calling, and definitely repetitive text messages too. All right. So I wanted to take a moment to just talk a little bit about teen dating violence statistics and how often we know these phenomena are happening. A 2013 national survey found that nearly 1 in 3 high school students who had dated in the past year were physically or sexually abused or both by somebody that they had dated. So that's 1 in 3 students who are dating has experienced some sort of physical violence. Nearly half of dating teens have experienced controlling behavior by a partner, and nearly a quarter of dating teens have experienced technology abuse by a partner. But we have another statistic that shows that more than half, 51% of middle school students reported that they were victims of electronic dating violence. So certainly we know that the teens, young people use social media, their phones far more than the older generations do, and so we're seeing that the violence is sort of morphing into the cyber platforms, and it's happening at extremely high rates. So some of the things we want to keep in mind when we're working with young people are the different ways that young people are experiencing life as opposed to adults, and the impact that has on who they are and how they relate with the world around them. In a lot of ways, young people are very similar to adults, and they feel all the same complex emotions that adults feel, and they experience the same range of feelings and desires and hopes, dreams, etc. But there are some important ways in which youth are different. One is the importance of peer groups. Young people are often surrounded by people in school 24/7 and are constantly under the influence of their peer group. And because of that, are often pressured into dating before they might be ready, or pressured into performing more adult dating behaviors before they're ready. But also it's very difficult for them to break away from their peer groups. So when they're experiencing abuse in school or bullying from their schoolmates, it's almost impossible to fully break those connections because they are in a confined space with those people every day when they're at school. We also want to talk about life experiences, because obviously someone who is younger has less life experience than somebody who's older. That might not always be true for particular areas of life. Certainly there are young people who have experienced more in certain areas of their life than adults have. But in general, a young person is going to have fewer life experiences to put all of their life experience into a larger context. We also want to talk a little bit about their developing identity and how a young person for the first time might be developing who they are as a person and trying to develop their self-esteem and figuring out what their values are, what their talents are, and who they want to be. And that sort of goes hand in hand with the ongoing brain development. Often we talk a lot about the frontal lobe and how for a young person the frontal lobe is not fully developed, and so they have difficulty making decisions and tend to take more risks. But what we also don't generally talk about is that a young person's logic and reasoning skills are also developing for the first time, which brings to the forefront a desire to question authority, as well as a desire to establish who they are and their values, which is, links into the developing identity again. And then the last one I wanted to point out is the lack of resources. And obviously, depending on the populations that we're working with, many people are, experience a lack of resources, whether they are young people or adults. But young people experience it in a slightly different way, which is to say that they lack the ability to make money in a lot of situations. They also lack the ability to have any kind of transportation if they're not able to drive themselves or not able to pay for transportation. And they also may have a lack of resources in terms of knowledge of what services might be available to them, what legal rights might be available to them, etc. And then before we sort of get right into it, I also wanted to take a second to think about technology. A lot of times in spaces that focus on dating violence, we vilify technology as this evil thing that is destroying the world. But the reality is that technology is a tool, and like all tools, it's neutral, and it can be used as a tool for the abuser, but it can also be used as a tool for a victim. And so when we're thinking about the way that technology and social media are working together, we should always be looking for how can this benefit the victim in addition to what are the ways that this could harm a victim. So as an example, an abuser can use technology to track somebody's location to make it easier to stalk them. They can engage in cyberbullying, sextortion, which is any sort of extortion that comes with a sexual element, sexual coercion element, as well as they can send threats through technology. They can maintain constant contact with their victim. By limiting their victim's access to technology, they could be intensifying the isolation that their victim is experiencing. And then there's also the non-consensual sharing of intimate media, in which someone is not comfortable with their videos or pictures being shared, but they're shared without their consent. But on the other hand, technology can also be a tool for the victim. A lot of victims find that by sharing their location with somebody that they trust, they're able to stay safer by having somebody they trust know where they are at certain times. It's also a very powerful evidence gathering tool, because when texts or social media posts are present on somebody's phone, a screenshot is very easy to take, and then you have that preserved for the court process. We also find that there are a lot of online resources that are really important for recovery for many people. Therapy is now available through text message and video chat. There's also access to all kinds of information about dating violence, and Break the Cycle's website is one such online resource that's fantastic. We also know that people are using technology to keep electronic copies of their protection orders or their safety plans so that they're available whenever they may need them. We also know that technology can be used to block the abuser and prevent contact. And finally, I think it's important to note that people can connect with other support systems, find other people who have been through similar situations as them, and find comfort in knowing that they are part of a wider community online. So I wanted to talk about the ways that we see technology being used to perpetuate dating abuse specifically. As you can see through this picture, the constant text contacts is certainly one of the most common ways that we see dating abuse used through technology. But certainly threats and using location data to stalk someone are common as well. Posting or threatening to post photos without somebody's consent. Doxing, does anybody in the comments want to tell us what doxing means? And same with spoofing. I know somebody mentioned spoofing earlier in the comments. If anybody has a definition for those, I would love to hear them. And if not, I'm happy to tell you them myself. And then for impersonation, that is when somebody is using social media pretending to be somebody that they are not. So logging into somebody else's social media account to post things on their behalf, or otherwise texting from their phone number to be pretending to be them, that sort of thing. Shelley Matthews gave us a definition of spoofing. Thank you. Spoofing is where they mask their phone number with another familiar number. That's absolutely correct, and it's very easy to spoof. You can do it from a lot of different websites. All you do is type in the number that you want to contact and then the number that you want to appear on their caller ID or on their text message to make it appear as if the communication is coming from another number. And it can be a familiar number that allows them to sort of pass it off as if they are impersonating someone else. I've heard of examples of spoofing happening where the abuser makes the phone number look like it's coming from the courthouse itself to tell the victim that their case has been dismissed so that they don't show up for court. And I've also seen situations where it's not quite as elaborate and they just are using an unidentified number so that it can't be traced back to them. Erica Johnson gave us a definition of doxing, which is releasing personally identifying info, name, phone number, workplace, etc., online, often to encourage other people to harass someone. That's put perfectly. I don't think I could elaborate on that any better. So thank you, Erica. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the ways that we've seen technology being used to facilitate stalking as well. What we have here are 3 pictures of different ways that it can be used. The first picture with those keys is a tile. The tile device is one example of a GPS tracker that is marketed to help you find your keys or your phone if you misplace them, but is also very easily misused by someone who wants to find someone's location by throwing that into somebody's backpack or into their car and then having real-time notifications of where they are at any given time without them even knowing that it's present. And the thing that's very interesting about the tile is that it is connected to an app on a phone. And so anyone in the world who has the tile app on their phone and has Bluetooth enabled on their phone becomes part of the system. So the tile device pings off of the device if it's nearby, giving location information for the tile, meaning that it has a conceivably infinite range as long as there is somebody around who has the tile app and their Bluetooth activated on their phone. The tile will continue to transmit location anywhere in the world. The second picture there that has Central Park written across it is an Instagram post that gives somebody's location and the time of the day where they were. And that is just an example of how posting certain things on social media can transmit information to somebody you may not want to have it about your location or the time that you're at a certain place. And so keeping in mind that that's one way people are finding other people's locations. And then the last one of Google is just that many people don't realize that your Google Gmail account is linked to so many other sources of information about where you may be at any given time, including your calendar, your Google Maps, and your contacts. And so with if somebody has access to a username and password for a Google account, they not only have access to all of your emails, but also to all of the other information that could potentially lead them to where you are. And so it's important to keep in mind that those are dangerous things connected together. I also wanted to talk about how spyware can be used to facilitate stalking. So generally, spyware is an application or software that is loaded onto a device that allows somebody to access the information that's being transmitted through that device. And so if spyware is uploaded onto somebody's phone, all of the information that goes through the phone is being transmitted to a third party through that spyware application. And so that's the most sophisticated version of spyware, but then there are also all of these other things that can be repurposed to become spyware. So in the top right there, we have a picture of a home security system, home thermostat system. You can see just a little dot at the very top of that circle. That's a video camera. And so if somebody has access to the account that operates that system, they access information about if the lights are turned on, information about what the thermostat is set to, but also to that camera. And that brings knowledge of if the person is home at the time, if they're gone. It may give more information about where they're going, things of that nature. We also have just to the left of that a smartwatch. I believe that's a Fitbit, but it could be a different brand. But the idea is that a lot of times these smartwatches are transmitting information about location to an app and providing real-time GPS location intended to track a workout like a run or some other form of exercise. And if somebody has access to that account or to the information about that account, they then have access to real-time information about your location. And then the last one is the Amazon Alexa. There's a couple of different versions of that, but that's providing access to what's happening in a home or wherever the device is located constantly. It's an always listening device, which is always picking up and transmitting potentially that information somewhere else. And so those also can be used as a form of stalking. To talk a little bit about how technology we've seen used to perpetuate sexual violence, we want to include recorded sexual assault. So that's a sexual assault that is videotaped or photographed in some way. Generally, it's then transmitted somewhere else or to someone else to further the victimization, which sort of bleeds right into the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, which falls under sextortion, which is, again, extortion that has a sexual element, requiring sexual favors in exchange for not disseminating sexual information or otherwise blackmailing someone into engaging in sexual activity. And then under there, I also have the bullet point revenge, because it's often called revenge pornography, but what we know about it is that it's usually not used as a form of revenge so much as that it's more of just a form of power and control. And it's often not used as a form of pornography. Again, it's more used as a form of power and control. And so the term revenge pornography isn't one of my favorites. Instead, I prefer the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. So it doesn't flow off the tongue quite as well. It is more accurate. We also know that 1 in 6 teens with a cell phone have received sexually suggestive images or videos of someone that they know. And for the adults in the room who might be thinking, oh man, young people, they really love to sext a whole lot, and I can't understand that. Please keep in mind that AARP did a study that found out that quite a large number of people over the age of 65 also engage in sexting behavior. And so it's not something that's limited to young people, and sometimes it makes it a little easier to wrap your head around why that might be occurring. I also want to inform you that 60% of those who are threatened to expose intimate photos of somebody followed through on that threat. So we know that not only are the threats occurring, but that they're often actually following through, sharing those images on Instagram, on Snapchat, texting them to their friends, disseminating them to the whole school, that sort of thing. And also, 40 states and the District of Columbia have laws that criminalize the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. The number is steadily climbing, but we do not currently have a federal statute that criminalizes that conduct. So if anybody is working on policy, that's a great area of need right now. So I'd like to take a moment to see how much of text lingo and teen slang we as a collective group can decode, because if you're looking at some text messages or some posts from social media and there's language on there that you don't understand, you're going to have a hard time figuring out if it is something that's harmful or something that's innocent. So I'm going to open this up to the text chat. Please type in the answer if you know it. We're going to start with the slang. Can anybody tell me what bae means? Before anyone else, that's correct. So it is technically an abbreviation, and it's used the same way that boo or babe would be used to say, oh, that's my boo, that's my babe. So you say that's bae. How about shook? Anybody got the answer for what shook means? Yeah, basically it means shocked. So the way that you would use that is say, something very surprising had me shook, or I was shook because of that. How about savage? Can anybody define savage for me? If we don't have anybody in the text chat, Stephanie, feel free to chime in also.
All right. So savage, like, is it harsh?
Yeah. So something that's harsh, generally used in the context of somebody calling somebody else out on the internet. So if somebody's very insulting or very harsh, you would say, oh, that's so savage. that kind of thing. How about low-key? Anybody know what low-key means?
Somebody's typing, so I'm going to give them a minute or a second.
I'm glad we're going over these because it seems like most of our participants do not know them. Subtly or
discreetly, kind of?
Kind of. That's absolutely right. So the way that you would say that is I would say, you know, I'm a casual fan of Taylor Swift. I'm a low-key Taylor Swift fan, that kind of thing. As opposed to a stan, which is another slang word that's not on there. A stan is somebody who's a hardcore fan of somebody. And you can also use it as a verb to say, I stan someone. All right, how about thought? Anyone know what thought means?
Ooh, somebody got clicked on that one.
Yep, it's that hoe over there. So it's another word for a slut or just generally someone that you don't like. And how about for the text abbreviations? Anybody can tell me what SMH stands for? Shake my head or shaking my head, that's absolutely right. So if you just can't believe something or something is very disappointing to you, you say, oh, SMH. How about IMHO? In my honest opinion is correct. I've also heard, in my humble opinion, I think both of them are correct. Anybody want to chime in with STFU, also read as STUFU? Yes, that is correct. It is shut the F up. Anybody want to go for OFC? Ooh, looks like that one's a little harder. So OFC stands for of course, because of course it does. And then how about GTFO? Yeah, that's right. It's get the F out. So thank you everybody who participated in helping with those. If these were particularly difficult for you, you can find more of them on Break the Cycle's website and also on our project called eTag, which is about cyber abuse online. The resources for those are provided at the end of the PowerPoint, so you can find all of those resources at the website that's on the very last slide. And then the last thing that I just wanted to highlight, and I'm not sure if everybody else is having as hard a time seeing this on the screen as I am, but what we have here are 2 locations on Google accounts where you will find information about who else has access to your Google information. So the first one on the left highlighted is the tab that says location sharing, and that's on the Google Maps application. And that shows if anybody else has access to your real-time location through your Google Maps account. The second one is the security settings on your Google account generally. When you go into security and scroll down a little bit, you'll see this box that says your devices, which shows you who is accessing your Google account, or at least the devices that are accessing your Google account. So you'll see there, this is a screenshot from mine. I have a Windows computer from Washington, D.C., which is my office computer, and the one that I'm on right now, so it says this device underneath it. I also have my Google Pixel phone, and then I have a Mac that is located in Silver Spring, and that's my home computer. So if I were to see another device showing up on here that I did not recognize or that I knew was related to somebody who should not have access to my Google account, you have the option here to remove their access to your Google account so they can no longer access it from that device. Makes it a little bit easier to prevent some stalking on Google.
All right, thanks, Nicole. I am going to talk a little bit now about how we see all this come in courts. We've talked about teen dating violence. We've talked about the abuse, the technology in those cases. But then how does this come to the courts? And that is really the focus of the presentation of the project. We wanted to look at how the court is going to see all of this come into play in their work. And so the first place, one of the main places I mentioned earlier that I've seen it, having worked a lot with protection orders, technology abuse being the basis for which a CPO, a civil protection order, or another legal action is sought. So the technology is actually part of the abuse. The threats via text message, threats via social media, those kinds of things. Or it could be the legal action, the criminal act, for instance, the as Nicole mentioned earlier, non-consensual sharing of intimate images, the actual use of technology could be the basis of the legal action, of the crime, of the means for seeking the protection, or the incident for seeking the protection order. Technology is also a concern for courts because when courts are drafting dispositions, it's really important, especially with teen dating violence, to think about how technology can be used as a safety tool, but also how it may be being misused and being able to address that effectively in dispositions. Technology may be used to violate a court order. I would see this all the time and with protection orders, both criminal protection orders and civil protection orders. Technology being used to try to violate the order in somewhat of a, to use Tweakur Speak, low-key way, or to try to get through to the victim in some way that is a little less overt, and it happened all the time. And then there's, of course, screenshots, social media posts, text messages, all of that actually being offered as evidence by either party to show the various things to bolster the claims in a protection order, the allegations, the incidents. I've seen a lot of this being used recently. I've read a lot about a lot of this in sexual assault cases, text messaging being coming into play in those cases. A lot of different ways where this kind of information may be used to help show other parts of the case, to help prove other parts of the case. So that's how courts oftentimes see the technology abuse. I mean, technology comes in a lot of ways in different cases, but when we're talking about actual use of the technology to harm, that's a lot of the ways we generally see it. Again, because we're talking about teen dating violence, there are a lot of instances where it does come into play with civil protection orders. And civil protection orders, the statutes vary across the country, and some have amended their statutes to specifically address cyber stalking or technology abuse, while others haven't. And though they may not directly mention cyber stalking or technology abuse in their definitions, a lot of the time you'll see, if you look at the intent and the impact, that technology still fits into what qualifies for a protective order. And so what are we talking about when we're talking about intent and impact? The one thing to remember is that when we're talking about teen dating violence and when we're talking about technology abuse, we're really still looking at the same types of tactics that are used in low-tech teen dating violence or intimate partner violence. In tech, the intent of the use is often to undermine the victim's credibility or to instill fear, to surveil, to really, in the end, try to gain or maintain that power and control. So that's something important to think about when we're trying to understand how the tech abuse is relevant, how we're really looking at this to fit into a protection order. And then the impact, it's important to consider the impact in a lot of ways is, again, the same as low-tech intimate partner violence, teen dating violence, but it's important to keep in mind that technology amplifies the abuse. Technology is everywhere, and it makes it easier for the abuse to reach more parts of our lives. And this is especially important when we're talking about teens, thinking back to what Nicole was talking about the importance of peer groups and of the developing identity for teens. It's really important to keep that in mind. Of how this really impacts, how this creates an important place where technology can really be used to have an impact as far as that power and control. Also, I think one of the most shocking things, one of the most hard to hear things when talking to victims, survivors of stalking, cyber stalking and such, is that it creates this feeling of being hunted, like there's nowhere they can go that the abuse won't continue. And so I think that that's another part of how the impact can be amplified when technology is used in the abuse. All right, so when we're looking at technology abuse and we're thinking about crafting dispositions, again, remember one of the places where judges and courts really step in with technology abuse is being able to considering safety, considering accountability in crafting dispositions in different types of cases. And I know we say this a lot, judges, court staff hear this a lot, attorneys hear this a lot, that every case is unique. But when we're talking about technology abuse, it's even more true that every case is unique, that the types of technology, the ways technologies are being used are constantly changing and constantly and are always being used in different ways. So it's important that we don't just think that boilerplate or cookie cutter language is going to be effective in addressing technology abuse. We need to really ask questions about what tech is being misused, how it's being misused, does the abuser have access to the victim's technology, really being specific in our language, in the orders, in order to address that. And it's also important to remember that effective disposition should both hold abusers accountable and consider safety of victims. So that means that it's not an option, or it shouldn't be an option, to just put limits on the use of the victim's technology. We're really looking at the focus to be on the technology by the use of the technology by the abuser. How do we hold the abuser accountable? How do we change behaviors in the abuser, not punish the victim? And that's really important because technology is such a part of different aspects of our life. I know we've covered a bit of that earlier, but we need to keep in consideration how might the parties need to use technology. I think there's, especially when we're talking about teens, we're talking about people that may be going to the same school. They may be having to use technology for school. They may have to use programs where they interact. How can we make sure that we address those safety concerns that come from the unique experience of being in school? How do we make sure that transportation isn't affected? Other parts of technology that people need to use in order to effectively be in society today, to be a member of society. A lot of ways technology has really become a part of that. So also, can the court address any pictures or videos of the victim that are under the abuser's control? This is something that often happened with clients I was working with, that they were scared about how they know when the other party has actually given up, has turned over, no longer has access to those pictures. Oftentimes those pictures or videos are used as intimidation factors to continue contact, or to get them to drop orders, to get them to not seek assistance from law enforcement because of the fact that they can't be sure that that's gone. So it's important to consider, are there any ways the court can address this, and being creative about ways that the court can address this. And that again leads into the next one. Can dispositions put in mechanisms in order to increase compliance and enforceability of orders? What might that look like? Are there ways to use juvenile services probation to help monitor compliance? Is there the ability to set up compliance hearings? Are there ways that we can look into and keep this off of the burden of the victim to seek enforcement of the order? Can we take on that role at all? So another part about after we've got the disposition, we oftentimes have issues where criminal no contact orders or civil protection orders are violated through the use of technology. I mentioned that earlier. And one of the reasons I think this may happen a lot, and one of the frustrating parts for victims and survivors about this use, is the fact that violations, a text, a post, something along those lines, can seem very, very minimal. It can seem very innocuous, very not a big deal. And so that can end up with getting responses from well-meaning law enforcement or courts or others about, well, you really want me to go out and arrest this person. You really want me to seek charges. You really want me to do something about a text message. And so that is something to keep in mind. And is also another reason why sometimes if we can find ways to take on part of the compliance, that really takes a burden off of the victim. And then also CPO violations based on technology may, because of this, come through to you in contempt procedures, contempt actions. And so some states, not all states, allow for protection orders to be enforced also by the parties by seeking contempt instead of prosecuted by the prosecutor. And so that's something to keep in mind, but those procedures are going to vary greatly. But if that's really one of the only mechanisms for enforcement, one of two mechanisms, it's important to make sure that that parties know how that happens, how to do that, how to be able to bring that kind of evidence of a violation, how to bring an action for that. So that's some of the things to keep in mind when we're talking about courts and technology and addressing technology. And I will turn it back over to Nicole.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I want to preface what I'm about to talk about, that this isn't a webinar on evidence or how to collect or maintain evidence, but I think having some of the strategies that we're about to give you about those things are really valuable, partially because each of us are humans who use technology and may at some point need to know how to save some of this evidence for ourselves or for somebody that we love. But also because you may be seeing this sort of evidence showing up in your court, and it's important to know how it was taken or how it works so that you can make a decision for yourself if it is valuable evidence, if it's reliable evidence, and if it's something that you want to see in your courtroom. So, in order to preserve evidence of cyber abuse, it's very important that you take your screenshots immediately. Things will disappear very quickly on social media. Often it's not in your control if whether or not something is going to stay on social media or not. And it's also important to keep in mind that depending on the platform that you're using, it might disappear more quickly than on a different platform. We talked a lot about how Snapchat is being used quite often to perpetrate abuse. And what we know about Snapchat is that those things disappear really quickly, and so it's important to take those screenshots right away. But also it's important to keep in mind that there might be situations where it's not safe to take screenshots. Snapchat and Instagram direct messaging both will send a notification to the other person if you take a screenshot of what they've written. And it may not be safe for the other person to know that the person has taken a screenshot. So if you're in that situation, there are apps that you can download that will sort of bypass that notification to the other person. But there is also the other much simpler measure of just using somebody else's phone to take an actual picture of the screen of the phone that has the information on it rather than taking a screenshot of the phone directly. The second thing I want to include is that it's very important that your screenshots show all of the important details from that communication, including the date and the timestamp, the contact information for the person who sent it, and it's also important to make sure that your screenshots overlap so that there's nothing potentially missing between one screenshot and the next screenshot so that we know for sure how the conversation flowed if it's going to take more than one screenshot to capture it. We're going to talk more about that in a second. The second thing is that it's important to keep your screenshots somewhere safe. Hard copies is usually the best way to print them out and keep a hard copy somewhere. Because devices can be stolen, broken, hacked into, all kinds of things can happen. If you're not able to get a hard copy, it's always a good idea to email it to somebody trustworthy, whether that's an attorney or an advocate or someone that you know will keep it safe, or to just make a new email account that you know no one else will have access to and to email it to that email account. And then the last thing is that cloud storage is definitely better than no storage, but keep in mind that cloud storage is not 100% infallible, as we've seen many instances of clouds being hacked and information being stolen from them. So keep that in mind if you're going to be using cloud storage. All right, so what we have here is a text conversation that I had with my sister. It's about Harry Potter, so I guess spoiler warning for that if you somehow haven't been exposed to Harry Potter in the last 25 years. But what I have done here is take screenshots of the conversation so that you can see exactly how it is that the screenshots should overlap if the conversation requires more than one screenshot to capture the whole context. So what you can see is that at the bottom of that first screenshot, I have a text message that begins fun fact, and at the top of the second screenshot, that text message appears again, fun fact. That way it's very clear that I haven't cut anything out of the conversation, that from one screenshot to the next, no information has been removed. Then same thing at the bottom of that second screenshot. My sister sent me a text message that says, got it. And then at the beginning of the next screenshot, it also says, got it at the top, again, to make sure that they overlap and they flow properly. The other thing I want to point out is that I have at the very beginning of the screenshot chain a date stamp that has the date and the time of this conversation. And I also have shown on this screenshot the contact up at the top. I have my sister in my phone as C-ster. That's exactly how she is in my phone. So if I were going to take this into court for whatever reason, I would also want to include a screenshot of that contact card that indicates that the contact in my phone labeled sister is also associated with the phone number that I associate with my sister, to make sure that we are getting that full context of who sent this information, when was it sent, and what is the full context, and nothing cut out of it.
All right, so the next one is something I've been seeing a lot coming up with attorneys and prosecutors as a similar way to capture that information. Anna, can I get you to help me? Thank you. So what this is a video of me taking a screenshot. Let me start that. It shows how it happens here. So what screencast or a recording, I hit the record button there, and then it records my screen. I'm going over to, you're going to see a flight delay that I had on United because I wanted to show something that I could show you the contact page as Nicole was talking about, but not share anybody's number over the internet. So you can see here is where you can find that information and locate how it is connected to those texts. That's something I've seen. Oh, and there, I tried to play along with the Harry Potter theme there, but then I realized it was going too long, so I just thought I'd just show the text there. But so yeah, so that's another way of seeing that information be captured and then used as evidence. So I just wanted to put that out there, as I've seen that, as that does become something I've seen attorneys like to use. So for some of the similar reasons that Nicole was talking about, with making sure that you have part of the conversation in each screenshot. So that, yeah, that's screencasting, screen recording. And that was from an iPhone, but there are apps and other ways to do that as well on Android phones.
Okay, and then I also wanted to just highlight some things, and we had a comment about, and I'm just going to read the comment in case there's anyone who can't see it. It says, as a judge, the person stalked or threatened needs to make sure any email, texts, or other written threats and or control put on social media are copied onto hard copy to preserve. Some of the comments disappear quite quickly, which makes it more difficult to prove in court. And I just want to say that's a great point. And one of the things that's important is to make sure that the litigants in your jurisdiction know whether they need to bring in a hard copy, or if something like a screenshot on their phone is appropriate, or if a screen capture of a video of their phone is appropriate. So it's important that they know what kind of evidence can be brought to court, whether that's pictures, screenshots, or witness testimony about phone calls or posts that are no longer available, but also making sure that they're aware of how your court will accept the evidence. So the person who commented, it sounds like they will only accept hard copies of the things that are used as evidence, whereas in other jurisdictions, litigants may be allowed to bring in their actual devices to show from their phone pictures, screenshots, or social media posts directly. So it's very important that litigants know which one is preferred in your court. It's also important that if you are a jurisdiction that requires a hard copy, that you start to think about how is it that somebody would get that hard copy, especially when we're thinking about young people. And we'll, just to bring us back to the very beginning when we talked about how young people have limited resources, they may not have access to a printer, they may not have access to ink, they may not even know how to connect their phone to a printer to figure out how to print something out. So it's important to make sure that you are keeping that in mind and deciding if the courthouse has some ability to provide printing services for that need.
So one resource, because parties don't always have an attorney that knows exactly how to get the evidence that the court needs that the court wants to preserve that evidence. So one thing that we have at NCJFCJ and through our Resource Center on Domestic Violence, Child Protection, and Custody is a guide on how to gather technology abuse for evidence for court. It's part of our self-represented litigant series, and it goes through different ways to capture these posts on social media, text messages, how to take screen grabs, how to do all of that. And it was written by Kao-Fang Lee and Ian Harris at National Network in Domestic Violence and for us. So yeah, so that's a resource we have available on our website, which we'll provide a link to at the end. And is really useful for courts. We've had a lot of courts that have asked to make these kind of guides more personalized to their court, and we've been willing to help them with that. But they're a great resource to have in a self-help center or something along those lines for when you do have unrepresented litigants trying to present evidence in stalking and domestic violence, those types of cases.
Okay, and
Nicole, do you want to go ahead?
We just wanted to provide you with a few additional resources. So Break the Cycle is working on a project specifically directed at technology abuse. It's called our eTag project. And you can find more information about it at endtechabuse.org. You can find all sorts of resources about cyber abuse, about evidence gathering. The Tweakur Speak resources are on that website. So if you want to learn more about cyber abuse or how to combat it, that's a great resource. And then also my email address is right there, so please feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions for me personally.
So again, we have the link right there to the Self-Represented Litigant series. We also have given you a link to, we worked with National Network in Domestic Violence on a cyber court training initiative recently, and we just put together a judicial technology abuse toolkit. A lot of the conversation around dispositions comes from resources we created under that. So you have a link to that, as well as a link to a technology guide for judges developed at the NCJFCJ that just goes through some of the different technologies, some real basics of technology for some judges who have not had a chance to see, feel, touch the different types of social media, et cetera, to give an idea of what's out there. But it's an ever-changing field, so that's something to also be aware of. And then you have my email address. Please send me emails if you have any questions as well. I can do my best to answer, or I will find answers. I know there's a couple of questions in here that we may not have gotten to as far as answers, but I'm happy to look those up if you just shoot me an email if you want anything around that. I also want to address the important point brought by Michael Patchen. I will allow info into the phone, but unless the litigant gets prior permission to bring their phone into court, our courthouse security personnel will not allow the phone to come into courtroom. I think that's really important. That is something that really varies from courtroom to courtroom, and it's definitely something that the judges talked about in our groups that were working to build a curriculum on cyber violence for the court. And that's something that it's really also a part of the services in the court, around the court, advocates in the area. It's the importance of having conversations with advocates in the area, legal aid in the area, to make sure that that information, because another point made by the judge was every litigant needs to find out what their court will and will not allow well before the day of the hearing. It's important that we make that information available, easily available to litigants so they can find that out, so that they know how to prepare, they know what form they can bring their evidence in. So that's a really good point, and it's really a good place for the court to lead in making sure that that information is out there to the community, to the people that they're serving, to the customers going through their help centers, using the court and representing themselves, and to really increase that access to justice. That's a big, really important topic that's gaining a lot of traction in making sure that courts really focus on that, and that part of it is making sure that that the community knows how to access the court. So I think that's a great point, and thank you for bringing that up. Other than that, if there are any last questions anybody wants to type in, I think we are done with our presentation. Again, please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you for joining us.